Great. Thanks, Honor. It's a pleasure to be with all of you today, and thanks for tuning in to a really important topic around our work as school leaders. As a former elementary principal, first, let me applaud you in the work that you're doing each and every day on behalf of students. It takes a very special person to want to be a leader at an elementary, middle, or high school and to help boost student achievement and build collective teacher efficacy. So on behalf of myself and all educators across the country, thank you for your work and leadership as well. So today we're going to be talking about ways in which you can enhance your own work as an instructional change agent so that you can really be that leader that you have been hired to be, whether you're at the elementary, middle school, or high school level. So before we get started, just want to share with you a resource that we will be giving away at the end of our webinar today, which is a copy of the book, The Instructional Change Agent, 48 Ways to Be the Leader Your School Needs. Some of the ideas that you'll hear today in this WebEx originate from the book here, and we will give that away at the end and then also give you more information on some other additional free resources that you might be interested in. So what I want you to take a moment and think about is when you see this word pop up on the screen, leadership, what does that word mean to you as a leader? And what I'd like you to do is just jot down a few notes in the chat and post those so that we can think about that word leadership together. So when you think of the word leadership, what characteristics do you think of when you hear that? So go ahead and add those into the chat room, and we'll just use some of those ideas that you have sitting out in the audience today to really generate that conversation. So Amy talks about a leader is a supporter. Great. Other ideas and words that are popping up on the screen. We see decision maker. I also see volunteer work. Other ideas that pop in when you think about leader. All right. See a couple other ones popping in here right now. I see advocate. I also see instructional leader. So as we think about the word leadership, what I want you to really think about is, as you define yourself as a leader, how would you create a definition? Have another word in here as servant. So as you think about that and think about the word leadership, I want you to take a moment and think, do your teachers know the word and the definition of leadership? And have you had a conversation around what does leadership mean? Because you are being judged as a leader, good, bad, or indifferent, based on different definitions. And so one of the first things that I'd like for you to consider as a school leader is making sure that you and the teachers and your support staff that are working in your building all have a consistent definition of leadership. Because when we're working from that same definition of leader, we can actually then start to move and make those shifts that we need to happen from an instructional standpoint. So what I want to do is offer to you today a definition that we'll work from for the next hour, which is creating shifts in thinking to build new norms. So as we think about leadership today, what we're going to be doing is really challenging your own thinking and how do we build those shifts in what's happening currently to where we need to be. You were hired by your superintendent and your school board because they believe that you have a vision that will help improve the school that you're currently working at. And in order to do that, you're going to have to build new norms that are happening each and every day. And so as we think about the word instructional change agent and the word leadership, our driving question really focuses around how do you organize your time as a principal so that you're creating ways to boost student achievement and really build collective teacher efficacy. And so that's the piece that I want us to really focus on today, is looking for ways that we can be a change agent around building collective teacher efficacy and increasing or boosting our student achievement. Because in order to be an instructional change agent, we really need to focus on our students. At the end of the day, we're asking our students to matriculate through our systems, whether it's elementary, middle, or high school, and leave our high school so that they can be productive citizens in the world in which they live. Whether they're going to go straight into employment, whether they're going to enlist into one of our armed services, or they're going to enroll in a college. And for some of our kids, they'll do multiple of those. Whatever pathway they're choosing, we need to make sure that we're preparing them in order to be successful and productive citizens in the communities in which they're going to work, live, and play. And so one of the pieces that I want to share with you just from research around the workforce development piece is what are the skills that we're asking kids to have when they leave high school and they move into employment. And so the World Economic Forum did a study and asked employers, what are the top 10 skills that we're looking for our students when they become members of society and start working in the employment industry? So as you look at these 10 skills, what I want you to notice are two things. First, which of these 10 skills do you actually see written in your academic standards? What we know is most of these skills that are up on the screen right now, in fact, are not listed explicitly in our standards, but yet this is exactly what our employers are asking for. The second piece I want you to think about is when you walk into classrooms, so if you go into a classroom tomorrow and you would take these 10 skills and observe in your classroom, which would you see actually happening in your school or in your district? Do you see those particular skills happen? So as we look at these 10 skills here and you go into classrooms tomorrow, which of these 10 skills would you see happening in your classrooms? And if so, how do you ensure that we're being intentional in the delivery of those slides? And if not, and we're not seeing those skills, what do we do in order to have a conversation specifically around how to start to infuse those into the work that we're doing as well? So what I'd like us to do is actually take a quick moment here, and I want you to take a poll around these 10 particular skills, and which of these skills do you feel like are the most important for your students when you're in the classroom? So as you're thinking about the poll here, I want to just really emphasize, as you think of these 10 skills, the best way to go about starting to look at how to interact in classrooms with these is to do exactly what we're doing right now and take these 10 skills and share with your faculty these skills from the World Economic Forum and have them prioritize which of those skills that we want to see happening. And these skills aren't skills that we need to worry about just at the secondary level, that these are really skills that should be starting at the elementary level and building out throughout the K-12 experience. And so as we think through these skills, really what does it look like when we coordinate with others at the elementary, middle, or high school level? And what does that look like if we see students doing this in a successful way?
So I'm sharing the results now. 43% wrote down critical thinking as their top one, followed by 29% said emotional intelligence, 14% said coordinating with others, and another 14% said active listening.
Great. So as we think about these skills, let's think about critical thinking for a moment. You know, how are we preparing students to actually build critical thinking skills in classrooms? So as we think about the critical thinking skill, for example, how do we create classrooms that really help support that particular skill in the work that we're doing every day? Are we creating opportunities for students to learn and grow around critical thinking skills? Are we giving them tasks that are requiring them to think differently around the content? Because what we know and what the data shows us is that only 69% of our students actually believe what they're learning in school today will help them in our future. And so what that means is that we actually have 3 out of 10 of our students that are sitting in our classroom and they're wondering, why do I need to know this? And how do I actually take what we're learning today and apply it into life? And so there's 2 ways for us to think about that. One specifically is how do we ensure that that's happening for students and we're building out that relevancy. And so that's where critical thinking skills can come into play. As we're sharing with students the why in the work that they're doing, making sure that they see those real life connections. That requires us to teach and for our students to learn in a way maybe that's different than what they've done in the past. We also know that we're on an upward trajectory around our high school graduation rate. And so what is projected by 2020 is that we'd like to see us getting toward that 90%. The most recent data that we have is really in 2016 that shows 84% of our students are at our high school graduation rate. And so again, the question is, what do we do with the other 16%? What are happening to those students who may not be graduating in that 4-year time frame? We also know as we look at our students that 1 in 5 teens have a diagnosable psychiatric disorder. And when we think about that, we have to really look at the work that we're doing as leaders is how do we ensure that they're being successful and have the right resources to help them be successful, not only in school, but as they grow and matriculate into the workforce as well. So in order to think about all of these pieces, those workforce-ready skills that the World Economic Forum talks about, as well as looking at our high school graduation rate, overlaying this with the social emotional learning that's happening in our schools, and the needs that are there, not only for students, but for our staff, we really want to think about shifts in our work as leaders. And that first shift is really around school culture. How do we build a culture that's successful for our schools? And so there's really 5 areas that I want us to think about when you think of school culture. Your passion, the actual student culture, visible culture of what you can see. What's the future culture of your school? So what do you want it to look like 3 years from now? And then the hidden culture. And where we're going to focus our time really is about building that student culture today, though there are ways in which we build out all 5 of these types of cultures that are in our schools. And so what I want us to really think about as we look at student culture specifically is really around how do we build opportunity for mentoring to happen for our students. What we know is that when we have students who have adults in the rooms that care about them, they are likely to perform better, to do well, and build out the success of their academics because of mentoring. And so what we want to do is be able to take a child and help them move from so many different pieces happening in their day to really get these arrows to align in a direction that's successful for our students and building that culture out. And so as we think about mentoring, what I would like you to do is take a moment and think about who are your most at-risk students. And you all define at-risk in different ways. That could be based on attendance, behavior, academics, family involvement, but think about who are those students that are most at risk and determine what's a manageable number for you to be thinking about. Is it 10% of your population? Is it just 5 students that you're going to start with? But identify who are those students that you want to focus on. And then what we want to do is build a schedule for those students where they can connect with a staff member in your school. And those could be staff members that are teachers who maybe don't have an assigned duty during a particular prep. It could be support staff. So if you have classified staff members, aides, paraprofessionals, librarians, media center, your secretaries, nurses, custodians even, but who are the people in your building, and do they have 10, 15 minutes in their day to connect one-on-one with a student? Then as you think about how to build out these mentor opportunities, train that small cadre of adults and help them realize that all you're asking them to do is to be a check-in person for that student each and every day, and figure out how you want to track the success of that work. Maybe it's collecting data, analyzing that information, but there's a daily opportunity for those students. And building out this opportunity for students to have a mentor, somebody in their life that's going to check on them and show that they care, really helps build out that academic success, helps increase attendance so that they're there every day because somebody's checking on them. We often see that behavior starts to decline because, again, they have an adult who cares about them. So this is just one way to think about the students who are most at risk in your school and how might you help support them specifically in being successful. Because what we know is that transforming culture in a school is a long-term solution, not a short-term fix. And so whether it's through mentoring or many of the other ways around school culture, we need to be systematic and intentional in picking out something that we're going to do that we know works for kids and then sticking to that. I think at times as a new principal, we will inherit a school improvement plan, or we will have a list of expectations that are required, and it's hard to figure out and determine what should I do first, and which of these are the priorities, and which of these do I need to maybe let go because we're not seeing that success. And so building out opportunities for your at-risk students would be one of these specific ways that I would spend time in ensuring that we're building out success for some of our students who are most at risk. The next shift I want you to consider is how do we really craft instructional practices? We all know that for ourselves as leaders, one of the most time-consuming pieces we have as a principal is the evaluation process for teachers. Whether it's through short or long-term observations, whether you're doing monthly walkthroughs or you're having to observe for 15, 30, or 45 minutes, we spend a lot of time in the evaluation process. And what I'd like for you to think about is how can you engage with your teachers before they actually teach those lessons. Because as we craft instructional practices, what we want to be able to do is create opportunities where we have students think critically, just like you shared in the poll earlier, that they have high opportunities for rigor and high opportunities for relevance. So the rigor relevance framework was first created by Dr. Bill Daggett, and what he shares is we really want to create opportunities that we would call quad D, where we have students who are doing the work and doing the thinking. In order for that to happen, we need to have kids moving toward higher levels of Bloom's and looking at analysis and synthesis and evaluation. And we want to make sure that we're providing real-world opportunities for students. So an easy example that I often share with a lot of teachers that I work with and administrators is when we think about the Pythagorean theorem, a squared plus b squared equals c squared. It's pretty universal. Most adults know what that theorem actually is, but where do we see that in real life? So instead of giving students 10 math problems with triangles, instead consider creating an opportunity for students to measure the entrance to the school that has a step up and tell them they need to develop a ramp and figure out what is the exact height and what's the hypotenuse of that ramp in order for a ramp to be used for maybe a student with a disability who is wheelchair bound. So giving students the real life opportunities where they're doing the thinking and they're doing the working to apply those skills. Then for you as the school leader, what happens when we have students starting to operate in this high level quad D learning, you're able to then move into the classroom and build out their thinking by asking these 3 critical questions. And these 3 questions allow you as a school leader to be visible, to actually entertain conversations with students and listen for the responses. So these are the 3 questions when you go into classrooms that I would encourage you to ask students while you're observing. The first is ask students, what are you learning? The second, how do you know when you know it? And the third, how does your teacher know you know it? When you first do this process with students, you're going to get very short, surface-level answers because they've not been asked to think about their learning in this way. And what we're really asking you to do as a school leader is not only observe what the teacher is doing when you're in, whether it's a walkthrough or an observation, but really focus on what's the actual learning that's happening. Because if our students can answer these questions to a level that is really well developed, we know that the instruction that's happening is also high level of achievement. If students can't explain how do they know when they know a particular concept or skill, then they're not really in a deep learning process of the information. And likewise, if they don't know how their teacher is expecting them to know it, they're not going to be able to demonstrate to the level of mastery that we're asking. And so what we do is we actually build out this process and we share with students and teachers alike that these are the questions we really want to focus in on. So that when we observe you in the classroom and I'm in the classroom as a principal, these are the questions that I'm going to ask. And whether it's the teacher asking these questions, whether it's me as the leader asking these questions, we're actually having kids really reflect on their learning. And what we know from John Hattie's work is reflection is a powerful strategy that has a high effect size. And so we want to really get kids thinking about their thinking or getting them in metacognition. So one of the resources that I have available for you when you ask these 3 questions is just a really simple rubric that you could use to assess how are the students doing in their responses to these 3 questions, so that you can quickly visit a classroom, ask 3 or 4 students these questions, and then assess how are the students actually responding to the learning that's happening in the classroom. And at the end of the webinar, I'll share with you where you can get to these resources that support this particular way as well. What we know is that effective instructional planning creates great learning opportunities for students. And so as leaders, we want to get in on the before as much as possible. And so crafting this process with teachers will help them build out their understanding of teaching and learning as well. Because what we know about the learning process is we need to make sure that the first day of learning is just as important as the 120th day. And if we are not taking each day with a sense of urgency, we really are doing a disservice for our students. And so we should always have a goal when we walk into classrooms to really identify what are students doing and thinking and how might they build out their understanding at a level that really shows mastery of learning. The next shift I want you to think about is really around student engagement. And as you think about student engagement, I want you to really focus in on the difference between a fixed and growth mindset. I know this is very popular right now. You may be familiar with it. But what I'd like you to do is really look down the right side of this slide in particular and looking at the growth mindset piece. I want you to think about growth mindset and then overlay that with the particular critical thinking skills and other World Economic Forum skills. And as you overlay those skills with what we need for a growth mindset, what we know is that students, when they know they can learn anything, they take a different approach to learning. And when they make a mistake, it's really part of the improvement process. And so that they can really identify what are the areas for growth and then help them move forward. And so one of the first pieces to have effective learner engagement is to ensure that we have a growth mindset in our schools. And so one of the ways to do that is to really go in and have you observe what does learning look like in your schools right now. So this particular way is called Be a Student. And what I would encourage you to do is to take a professional day, be in the building, but follow a student schedule from the first period to the last period, whether it's a classroom where you're in a specific room all day at the elementary level, or those students change from class period to class period. I want you to take a day and I want you just to watch learning for an entire day. Don't answer email, don't respond to phone calls, but really focus in on this is a professional learning day for you to understand what does learner engagement look like in our school. And the questions that you see up on the screen right now, these are the questions I want you to think about as you're observing learning in your school. So looking at, for example, what are the interactions that students have with one another? Are they interacting, and if so, is it very surface level? Or is the teacher asking probing questions that make students think critically? Are they creating tasks in which students have to activate prior knowledge and take new learning to create evidence that supports their learning? And then how do you know the interaction was worth the time invested? So this really becomes an opportunity for you to also look at how are teachers maximizing instructional time, and how do they ensure that the questions that they're asking is worth each student answering. And so as you think about these pieces of the puzzle, I really want you to think and watch throughout that day. What are your students doing? What are your teachers doing? Are you seeing evidence of rigor and real-life learning application? And how are students responding and interacting with one another? You know, as our students graduate high school and move on to one of the 3 E's, whether it's employment, enlistment, or enrollment, we want to make sure that our students are really collaborating and working together, because that's one of those skills that we see that they need in the future. And so we need to make sure that's happening often and frequently at all levels of learning in the process. So here is, again, another resource as a way for you to visualize how might you take notes around the learning that's happening in the classroom. So what I want you to do is, when you take this professional day, is to really focus in on, first, what are the actionable teacher behaviors that you're seeing in classrooms? Likewise, what are the student actions that you're seeing? What are the interactions? What are the tasks that they're being asked to do? And then please note in there evidence of rigor, evidence of relevancy, evidence of learner engagement. So as we think about this shift then, I want us to really focus in on really this last piece, which is around community partnerships. And as we engage and shift in this idea of community partners, what we know around the research of community partnerships is relatively clear, is that in order to have a strong instructional component that has a great culture and great learner engagement, there's also a connection to your families and to the larger community that you work and serve with. So as we think about what we're asking students to do with community partners, again, one of the resources that we think about is when we have families and community connected to the learning, we're able to actually see the quality of the program build out to their success as well. And so that's one of the pieces that I really want us to think about, is how are we connecting the community to the quality of learning that's happening in classrooms. The second research from Miller in 2005, again, no surprise, that positive relationships with the school and community foster high levels of quality engagement. And so when we think about what does engagement look like with our school and community, what we know is that the positive relationships that I as a leader have out in the community will enhance the actual school and the community that we work with. And then the third piece here, again from the World Economic Forum, is that a third of the skills that we think are important today in 2019 will actually change over the course of 3 to 5 years. And so one of the pieces that we need to be able to do regularly is really think about how do we connect with the community that we're working with, and are we really being responsive to the learning that's happening. And so what we know is that community partners offer feedback in the work that they do, and they do that through real-life application. And so one of the pieces that I want to share with you is way number 42, which is for you to actually have a community advisory team. And the community advisory team really builds out pathways for employment, enrollment, and enlistment. And what we're asking to do in this particular way is for you to take representatives from each of these areas and invite them to be part of a team that meets once a semester minimally, and have them give you feedback around what's happening in the workforce, what can you be doing, whether you are an elementary principal or you're a middle school principal, and focus in on what are those skills that they're seeing that they need to have happen, and how can they help give you opportunities to really increase the capacity of your curriculum and your content areas. And so this could be inviting them into your schools to not only meet with teachers, but also to build out other opportunities for them to connect into the classroom. So maybe they're observing in classrooms, they're doing a walkthrough with you and seeing the different ways in which your students are interacting. And what we know when they have these community advisory teams in place is that you actually end up growing advocates for your school. And so as we think about ways in which you can do this, this is where I would encourage you to reach out to your teachers and ask them if they know folks in these various areas within your community, and ask them to help build out some of those folks to serve on this advisory team so that they can help you with other areas as well. So here are some ways, once you have this advisory team, kind of the next steps. The first is determine your pathways. So as you think about the 3 E's, reflect on your community and who might be 3 to 6 members out in the community that could serve on your advisory team. Again, use faculty to help build out that list, and then communicate early and often with this team. So even though they may only meet once a semester, make sure they're receiving your monthly newsletter for parents and families. Maybe you're inviting them in for special events. You're encouraging them to volunteer. Help them find ways that they're going to be able to connect into the community beyond just those additional meetings. Next, make sure that you're developing really a state of the address that celebrates the pathways and the things that are happening in your schools. And we want to make sure that as you think about this advisory team, you're creating a robust agenda that really lends itself to collaboration. And go ahead and switch to the next slide. And then finally, as you talk through that evening with them, whether it's once a semester or you do it quarterly, and you're getting that feedback, make sure that as you get feedback from your community advisory team, you're also then using that feedback to improve your school. Because what we know is that when you are able to take that feedback and build out community advocacy as well as learner engagement, instructional practices, and school culture, you're really operating as that instructional change agent for your school and for your district and what that looks like. So one of the pieces that I want you to think about is you see these 4 areas of school culture, instructional practices, learner engagement, community advocacy. I want you to think which is the most useful to you. And so whether you're a Twitter user or if you want to just put in the chat, I would be curious to see which of these 4, the mentor moments, the 3 questions, the Be a Student, or the Community Advisory Team way, which of those four might be the most useful to you and why? So go ahead and share that in your chat. Or if you're a Twitter responder and you're active in the community, go ahead and tweet out as well. But I would be interested to hear from you on which of these four ways would be helpful or beneficial as you're thinking about improving culture, instruction, learner engagement, and or community partnerships. So go ahead and include that in your chat. So Delaney shares about mentor moments because we're currently focusing on student services program. That's great. You know, I think the mentor moment really does create this personal connection, and regardless if you're a school of 150 or you're a school of 550, having an opportunity for a student to connect with an adult every day, even if it's for 5 minutes, really gives them another reason to come to school every day. You know, so many of our kids, they come through school and they may not have a meaningful conversation with an adult all day. And what we know is our most at-risk youth feel the most disconnected in school. And so looking at where can I even carve out 10 minutes for our students to connect with an adult would be really powerful. Jennifer talks about the 3 questions. Great, Jennifer. I think that that's a really powerful tool for you as you're going in and doing observations. You know, I think, you know, when I went through training to do observations of teachers, you know, it was very scripted and I was required to write down everything the teacher was doing and how students were responding. So I always felt like I was a third party, kind of just observing in a classroom and not being able to really roll up my sleeves and get dirty with the learning. And so those 3 questions allow you just to get right next to those kids and find out what are they doing and how do they know they're learning it. And so I think that's a powerful way as well. Christopher talks about mentor moments. That one seems to be pretty popular as well. So just several in there, so that's great. Go ahead and go to the next slide for me. So a resource here I would like to share for you as you think about your time with a WebEx, and WebExes are great in delivering a lot of information in a short amount of time. But what I want to be able to have you do is take this information and do some reflection with it. And so one of the resources that I've given to you is an actual 20-day action plan. And so you can go to that URL, and it's a Google Drive doc that you'll save a copy on. And it actually gives you a template to take and say, okay, over the next 20 days, what is it that I want to be able to do? And so maybe as you leave here today and we have about, you know, just under 3 weeks of school left before Christmas break, maybe this action plan becomes what you implement when you come back in January. So feel free, it's a free resource for you to download and use. So take that resource, really take the information from today and work to do something with that so that you can make sure that you have adequate next steps to really build out that particular way that you identified. So as we wrap up today, I want to give an opportunity for you to really talk about your next step. And so as you leave today, you have 3 days left of this work week, and I want you to think about what is your immediate next step. If you leave here and you don't have an immediate next step, what we know is that you likely won't come back to this information, and then when you leave and you don't come back to this information, you're not able to implement to the way that you'd like. And so what is your immediate next step? So what I'd like you to do in the chat room is just record your next step or write it down if you're taking notes right now on your computer or on your notepad. But write down that next step. What is the first thing you're going to do as you leave this particular webinar today? And if you want to put it in the chat, that's great. And then we can share out 1 or 2 of those immediate next steps as well. Scheduling a day to observe. So Jennifer talks about really taking that idea of being a student and build out that particular day. Amy shares, familiarize yourself with the 20-day action plan. Great, Amy. And if you have questions about that plan, you know, please let me know. I'll share my contact information at the end, and I'm happy to talk with that plan through whether it's email or a phone call. Happy to set up a call after the fact too. Delaney talks about reflect on your takeaway from the webinars in writing to make sure we get that next step. And I think that you bring up a really good point, Delaney. We want to make sure that we're writing down our action step. I think as school leaders, we get so much information inundated to us all day long that we store in our head that we often forget about the power of the pen to the paper. And so really make sure you write down what are your 3 next steps and what that looks like. So great feedback there as well. So, I shared with you the instructional change agent. The 4 ways that I shared with you specifically in this webinar come from this book. And if you'd like more information, you can use that QR code and it takes you to our site, which is leadered.com/ICA, which stands for Instructional Change Agent. And so at this website, not only can you order the book, but many of the resources that I talked about today, you can also download. The whole purpose of writing this book and creating the companion website was to make the lives of leaders a lot easier. I always wish as a principal I had just this plethora of ways that I could enhance culture, instruction, learner engagement, community partnerships. And so as a principal and then out working with schools and districts across the country now, just continued to collect opportunities or ways to enhance the work that we do, and then bundled them together as a way that you can easily read, digest, download the resources, and implement. Your life is super busy as a school leader, and this is just a way for me to give back to the community to make it just a little bit easier. So all of the resources at the website you can download in both PDF and Word form. So if you want to modify it and make it your own, you have that opportunity with a Word doc, or you can just take the PDF specifically and use it as is. And so all of those resources, again, are free downloads at leadered.com/ICA. Next slide. So again, a couple other resources. If you want to continue to reach out to me, there's a URL there, tinyurl.com/ICAgent 2019. And we can stay connected that way by filling out that form. There's also a bonus way there that you can download that will give you more information, like the 4 that I shared with you today that focused on culture, instruction, learner engagement, and community partnerships. Shared with you at the beginning that we also have some other ways for you to connect with us. We also have just launched a podcast. So if you are someone who enjoys a podcast as you drive to and from work, or you listen to podcasts as you exercise or whatnot, feel free to check out this podcast, Lead Change in Education. It's co-hosted with Mark McElmoyle, and he is a school leader in the state of Minnesota. And our sole purpose of this podcast is to interview principals just like you who are doing great things in your schools. And so the first season just dropped here this fall, so there's 12 episodes. And each episode features a different school leader, and they share one way in which they're boosting student achievement or building collective teacher efficacy. So I invite you to check that out, and or if you would like to be a guest, please let me know that as well. Next, we do have giveaway for the book, and so before our session, Honor and I talked, and I picked a random number, and that number correlates with one of our participants in the room today. So, Honor, would love to know who is going to win a free copy of the Instructional Change Agent.
And we will do that. We will send you an email following this webinar if you are the chosen person.
Perfect. And so then, as we wrap up today, what I really want you to think about is the work that we do as school leaders is incredibly important, and it requires a lot of time and a lot of energy. But what we know is if we're going to be an instructional change agent, we have to be operating on all cylinders at all times. And that means having a strong culture. It means making sure that we're creating instruction and teaching and learning that is relevant to kids, that's highly rigorous, that we have students that are actively engaged in critical thinking and can coordinate with others and really build in those 20 skills from the World Economic Forum. And lastly, that we're looking at ways that we engage our community outside of our school so that we can bring in those folks and we can enhance the curriculum that's happening. Because what we know is that when we engage the community, the research shows that we create stronger schools. And my hope and goal for you is that you really are the change that you wish to see in your schools. And so my contact information is there at the bottom. You can stay connected with me via email, adrummond@leadered.com. And then I'm also on Twitter, and you can follow me at Adam D. Drummond, and then the hashtag LeadChangeEd. And so with that, we'll leave just a couple minutes for any questions that we might have. Feel free to put those in the chat. And as we wrap up, it's been a privilege to be with you today, and thanks for working through our technical difficulty. It's real life, and I know you know that from the teachers and the leaders you work with in your schools. So appreciate your flexibility here as we were able to stay connected for our webinar today.
Right, and Adam, as they reflect on what they've learned today, I'd like to also give my many thanks to everyone who's participated today. If you'd like to revisit today's webinar recording, I'd like to encourage you to go to our NAESP website at www.naesp.org/webinars, and you can download both the PowerPoint presentation as well as the video recording of today, and I will be sure to delete all our technical difficulties from that. But anyway, are there any other questions before we end today? You've given us a lot to think about, Adam, which is great.
Great. Thank you. And as you leave here from this webinar and you move on into the work that you're doing, please know you can reach out to me anytime via email, add me on Twitter, and happy to jump on a phone call with you, WebEx, talk through the challenges that you're having. It's truly my privilege and pleasure to be able to work with school leaders across the country. So anything I can do to help make your lives easier and help you problem solve or brainstorm, please let me know. As you know, being a member of the professional network, whether it's NAESP, whether it's your state association or both, hopefully, the network that you create makes your job more manageable, and ultimately you become more successful. So it's a privilege to be part of the NAESP organization, and I hope that you continue to reach out to the many resources they also have available, whether it's the WebExes or webinars they're doing right now, the Principal Magazine, the Twitter chats that they host, or the many events that they do and conferences. So please make sure you can stay connected with NAESP so that you can be well served as you continue to help boost student achievement and build collective teacher efficacy.
And be sure Adam is going to be presenting at our summer conference, right, Adam, in this July in Louisville, Kentucky. So we encourage all of you to join us in Kentucky and meet Adam personally. And again, if NAESP can ever help you in your professional development, if there's more that we can do, please feel free to contact us. And with that, I will wish you all an awesome afternoon, and we hope to see you in Louisville, Kentucky. Bye-bye.
Great. Bye.
Thank you, Adam.